You need winners? Let the Football Insiders show you how to make money. General Manager Al DeMarco, a former sports reporter and contributor on Fox Sports, MSNBC, and Comcast Sports TV, brings over 25 years of handicapping experience to the table. CEO Steve Budin, the author of Bets, Drugs, and Rock and Roll, is the man responsible for creating the sports betting industry. Together, they are the Football Insiders, your number one source for football winners.
4 games decided by a single point. 5 teams had to rally from a second-half double-digit deficit to win. We had one double-digit favorite that didn't come close to covering. Yes, we're talking about you, Seattle Seahawks. And we had one team pitch a shutout. Who would have thought it would be the San Francisco 49ers? And that was just week number 1 of the NFL season. Week number 2 is upon us, and this is the only nationally televised show that breaks down your top NFL games from a point spread perspective. Hi, everyone. Al DeMarco here along with Steve Budin, and this is what we've been doing for the past 10 years. We're the Football Insiders, and this is the countdown to kickoff. And Steve, let's get it started with 2 teams that both had to rally at home from double-digit deficits in the second half. One got the cover, one didn't. And I'm talking about the Houston Texans, who are hosting the Kansas City Chiefs. We've got Houston, a 2.5 to 3-point favorite at home. Of course, the Texans, I used them as a free pick last week, and they rallied from 10 points down to get the job done, both on the field and in Vegas against the Chicago Bears. Meanwhile, Kansas City finding themselves down 24-3 at home, a defenseless game as far as KC was concerned against the San Diego Chargers. They did win in overtime, but they were fortunate, but they certainly did not get the cash in Vegas. Your thoughts on this particular game?
Right, so one of the rules as gamblers, Al, that you know we live and die by is you never bring last week's misery into this week's betting budget. And there's a lot of people that got killed last week with Kansas City by 0.5 point, and they're miserable right now. But as you look at this week's game, you can't bring that misery forward. For me, I think that Kansas City owns this Houston team. They beat him 30-0 last year in the AFC wildcard game, and I know everybody's high on Brock. But to me, he's just a big Brock of mediocre crap. He's not going to the Hall of Fame anytime soon. He didn't own the last team. I don't think he's going to own this team. I like KC here. I think it's a big game for them. I think they blow him out.
Oh, I think you are totally mistaken on this one. I'm sorry. I agree with you to a certain extent. First of all, they are not getting Brock Osweiler fitted for the yellow suit at Canton anytime soon. But he had a very good game in his first game in a new offense for Bill O'Brien for the Houston Texans, 22 for 35, 231 yards, 231 yards, and he spread the ball around in that offense, hit 8 different receivers. But I thought the key free agent acquisition for the Texans, believe it or not, was actually a guy that you're familiar with down in Miami, a guy who I thought had always been underutilized by the Dolphins. Lamar Miller had a career-high 32 touches last week, had 106 yards rushing. He's really going to be the guy, I think, early in the season that's going to get the tough yards for the Texans. Now they've got an offense, and I think that offense is only going to get better. And listen, bottom line is you cannot look at what happened last year, and I agree with you. As a gambler, as a handicapper, you got to have a little short-term memory deficit. You can't let what happened last year affect how you handicap, how you gamble, how you look at teams this year. So in that particular point, we are 100% agreement. Brock Osweiler, Brian Hoyer, no comparison. But this is a team, the Texans, that have covered 12 of their last 15 as a favorite. This is a Kansas City team that last week could not get any pass rush at all against Phillip Rivers. And the bottom line is here that I think the Texans are going to be able to win this game. They're playing at home, and let's not forget, what did the Texans have that the Kansas City Chiefs showed last week that they did not have against San Diego?
Hot cheerleaders.
They have a defense. They got a defense. They were number 3 in defense last year in the NFL. And last year, the final 9 weeks of the season, they only gave up 12 points a game. And they abused Cutler of the Bears last week, had 5 more sacks. Listen, bottom line, they're going to give Alex Smith all he can handle. Love this price. Think it's a cheap one. Going to go with Houston there. So totally in disagreement. But this next game, I think we are going to be in total agreement. We do not talk about these games in advance, but something tells me we're both going to be betting this one. New England -7 At home against Miami, I think it could be minus 17. We would both be lining up to bet the Patriots.
Al, I used to hang out at this corner bar. It was actually called the Corner Bar. And it was a dive bar. And whenever a pretty girl used to walk in, my buddy Moron, and yes, I've got a friend named Moron, used to always look at the girl and say the same thing. Wow, look at that. It's New England plus 10, he'd say. New England plus 10. The joke obviously being that you never get New England plus 10. Well, last week you got New England plus 10, and what did they do? They won the game outright. Patriots are just too good. This is the second week in a row that the official will be on the road. They'll be home next week. They'll be 0-2 when they get home, and maybe they'll do better then.
Hey, the bottom line is this is a series that has gone the way of the home team. Home team has won and covered 6 straight in the series. Patriots have won and covered the last 4 in Foxborough. All double-digit margins. The average winning margin in those 4 New England victories, 23.8 points. I think they can easily win this game by 24 points this weekend. Listen, they won last year, 36-7 at home. You know, it is an amazing thing, Steve. And as a former bookmaker, I don't understand, and perhaps you can shed some light here. We saw New England go into Arizona. We saw them pretty much dominate that game. They jumped out to the 10-0 lead, and they did whatever they wanted to against Arizona. We saw Miami. If you look at the final score, you saw Miami go to Seattle, and they played hard, and they only lost 12-10. But if you looked at the box score like I did, you saw that they got dominated statistically by the Seahawks. So now you see Miami. They have to go cross-country again, second straight week on the road, and they're only a 7.5 point underdog in this game. Again, I think New England should be laying at least 10 points in the game, that they have dominated in this series. The home team has dominated. They've dominated at home. I don't understand this line.
So to understand the line, it's really the beef is not with the bookmaker, but it's with the actual better, because all the line is a mirror of public perception. So when we see lines that haven't quite caught up yet, it's not that the little Chinese mathematician in the back of the bookmaker's office is off. It's not that. It's that the gamblers haven't caught up with the lines yet, and because of that, that's why we always say as professionals that there is value to be had in the first couple of weeks of the season, not because the line makers haven't caught up, but because the bettors haven't caught up.
Exactly, Stephen. I think that's what the average gambler sometimes doesn't quite understand when they're saying, oh, this is a bad line. They don't quite understand what goes into the making of a bad line, the setting of a bad line, the ideology behind what a bad line is. And we're going to talk a little about numbers here in just a second. But let's first talk about this Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game. Listen, this is not a game that I'm particularly enthralled with. I'm a Steelers fan, grew up as a Steelers fan. This line, -3 at home for Pittsburgh. What I think is most prevalent in most bettors' minds is that they saw the Steelers kick Washington's ass on Monday night. That's the last thing they remember. They saw the Cincinnati Bengals go to New York. They saw Andy Dalton sacked 7 times. They saw the Bengals need a last-minute field goal to win that game. They see the Steelers win easily against Washington. Last thing in their mind, Steelers dominated. That's the way they feel. Personally, I think the Steelers win this game. But again, I also believe that you never bet with your heart. You always have to bet with your head. So since I have a personal rooting interest in the Steelers, I just don't like this game. But we also remember the last time these two met in the playoffs last year, where Marvin Lewis is lucky to even have a job this year after that total meltdown where basically Cincinnati lost their cool, couple of costly personal fouls after a fumble. Pittsburgh got a game-winning field goal, advanced. Cincinnati exited from the playoffs once more. Your thoughts on this one?
Well, they always say that emotion is a bookmaker's best friend, and that's because it's hard enough to pick winners in this godforsaken sport. And when emotions start to come in and you're a fan and you like a certain team, it skews your opinion. It skews your opinion of your opinion. So even when you have it straight, you second guess yourself because you want to be sure that you're not letting your emotions get the best of you. Everyone's making a big deal about Cincinnati going into Jersey and beating the Jets, but let me tell you something. The Jets played that game to lose. Twice they had the ball at the end of the game inside the 10-yard line. Both times they didn't have the balls or the winning mentality to be able to go for a score. Instead, they settled for 2 field goals. Both times, that's what cost them the game. This wasn't about Cincinnati being so great. This was about the Jets and their loser mentality. I watched Pittsburgh last week, and my God, Ben Roethlisberger is back out. He looked like Ponce de Leon himself. 27 of 37, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, only 1 interception. That's the key. I love Pittsburgh in this game. I'm laying the 3. I'm not buying the half a point. I'm not worried.
Well, I will point out that the Steelers have covered 4 of the last 5 regular season meetings, but let me just play devil's advocate. Even though I'm a huge Steelers fan, let me point out that Ben Roethlisberger's performance on Monday night came against a Washington defense that was awful last year and is apparently just as bad this season. But you did bring up something about Roethlisberger. Listen, that Steelers offense put a lot of points on the board last year, but they would have scored even more if it wasn't for the fact that Roethlisberger had so many turnovers. 21 touchdowns, but 16 interceptions. Albeit, Monday night, he did all that damage, even though 2 of his top 3 receivers from a year ago were out. Even though Bell was out, but then you saw the game that D'Angelo Williams had. But again, the Redskins couldn't stop the run. But one thing that bothered me about that Cincinnati defense, against the Jets, they couldn't stop the run either. 152 yards rushing they allowed. That's 5.1 yards per carry. I tend to agree with you. Playing at home after the big road win coming off the Monday Nighter, I think Pittsburgh is the play here, and I think they will win this game. But again, not one that I'm particularly enthralled about. Steve, let's take a moment before we get to the Washington-Dallas contest, and let's talk about lines. And the one thing that I think that a lot of gamblers out there make the mistake is that they do not price shop. They do not comparison shop in terms of trying to get the best line on games. And what I mean is, I believe whether you're playing in your backyard locally with a bookmaker, whether you're playing in Vegas up and down the strip, or whether you're playing offshore, you've got to have 2 different sources, 2 different books, and definitely always be shopping and comparing prices.
I agree, Al. And look, let's call it what it is. It's laziness. You can't be lazy as a customer. It could be the difference of winning or losing for the year. I mean, there's a reason why in Vegas the sports book only holds 1%. That means all the volume they do, they make about 1% profit. If you look at the offshore numbers, they're holding between 16 and 19%. And that's because bettors in Vegas tend to be sharper simply because they have the availability to line shop and go from door to door. Each hotel has their own set of lines and find the place where they get an advantage, a half a point, sometimes a full point. Over the course of a season, it makes a very big deal. Another thing we always talk about, Al, is timing. If you're going to bet New England at home against a shitty team, chances are you should lay that number early in the week when it's still small. As you get closer to Sunday game time, it's only going up. If you're going to bet against New England and take the points, you wait till the last very second, give everybody a chance to bet it up so you can take advantage of that and get as many points as possible, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Listen, 99.9% of the time, if you're betting the favorites, you bet early. You're betting the underdogs, you're betting late. Go back in time. Look at this Arizona-New England game just from this past Sunday night. It was the prime time game. It was the bailout game. You knew Tom Brady wasn't playing for the past 4 months, okay? That line was 7 all week long. You knew. If you were betting Arizona, you knew that game was only going to go up. That line was only going to go up for Arizona. And what did it do? As Sunday afternoon progressed and all the public money started coming in because it was the bailout game, that line started climbing from 7 to 8, up to 9, up to 10 in some places. Well, Jesus, what were you doing? If you liked Arizona, you didn't just wake up Sunday afternoon and say, gee, I'm going to bet Arizona. You had to like them last Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. You bet Arizona then. Now, if you like New England, well, certainly you were waiting to the last moment. And that brings up another point I wanted to discuss with you, Steve. There are certain, if you're playing offshores, a couple of big, publicly named offshore sports books. And we're not going to name them, of course, but there are a couple of them
where they inflate the favorites.
Where you always are laying more points, at least a half point more, or maybe even a point more with favorites, which sucks if you're betting the chalks. But if you're looking for an underdog, you got to have an account with those type of guys, because then you're not buying the extra half point for insurance most times, because you're getting it for free in those particular cases with those big books. Same thing in Vegas. You might be playing at the Wynn, but you can go over to Stations Casinos. You can go down to the South Point. Generally, the lines are a little heavier for chalks. Well, hell, you can get that half point extra for free.
And back in the day, we would always keep a local book in New York, a local book in Miami, and one in Texas if we could. Those are 3 states that betting is prominent and has tons of bookmakers. And we'd have one in Philadelphia. And the reason we'd have those local books is because we know in Philly they skew the Eagles a point and a half high for local bettors. Miami, they do the same with the Dolphins, New York with the New York teams, and Texas with the Texas teams, and on and on and on. So if you're someone who's a fan of their pocket, and not necessarily a fan of a team, you know if you're going against the Dolphins, well, you should call your Miami local bookmaker because it's like a one-team teaser when you can get plus 1.5.
Exactly, Stephen. As you said earlier, ultimately it comes down to laziness. You know, we laugh when our wives or our girlfriends, or in some people's cases maybe you have both of them, but we won't touch that. You know, we may laugh at them when they're price shopping for that dress between Target and Kohl's, but in reality, every single gambler should be doing the exact same thing, and if you're not, it's sheer laziness. It's going to cost you over and over again over the course of the season. So listen, that's our advice. Whether you take it or not, hey, you can laugh at us, but I think we certainly know what we're talking about. And again, there's Steve Budin, a guy who created the offshore sportsbook betting industry that you know today. Ain't nobody knows it better than him because he's been on the other side of the fence taking your money. Steve, let's talk about the Washington Redskins because, boy, there's a team that took a lot of people to the cleaners and took a lot of money and made bookmakers rich with that debacle on Monday night. I don't know why anybody thought the Redskins were any better than they were last year. They couldn't play defense last year. They didn't get any better, and it certainly showed on Monday night. But here they are. They're a 2.5 to 3 point favorite at home against Dallas. Cowboys, they lost by 1 point at home to the Giants. Big deal. To me, the way I look at this game, must-win situation for the Redskins. Got to win this game, no ifs, ands, or buts. 2.5, 3 point favorite. If they had won, Redskins, or played better on Monday night against the Steelers, they're a 4.5, 5 point favorite. This is a bargain basement price for the Skins.
I agree. Cowboys 1-12 without Romo as a starter. Even worse, they're 0-4-1 against the spread in their last 5 games overall. Most people, Al, they're going to be reluctant to bet on Washington this week after they got manhandled by the Steelers last week. But I really believe that loss to Pittsburgh was more about how good the Steelers played than it was necessarily on how bad this Washington team is. This is a perfect spot for the Redskins to bounce back and get what you called, and you're right, a must-win. Look, I think that Washington is the play here. If they can't beat Dallas without Romo, it's time to take up lacrosse.
Exactly. And let's remember, what you said is so accurate. This is not Ben Roethlisberger. This is Dak Prescott. This is Zach playing his first road game, okay? It's over. No way the Cowboys are winning this game. Giants in New Orleans. Last year, these two men in the Superdome, 747 points were scored between these two. I don't care who wins this game. The only way, I just look at this game and I go, over. It's 53 points. Got to play it over. Yeah, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Yeah, and people continue to be scared of betting the over with New Orleans, especially when they travel away from home. I saw the game last week. Drew Brees looked like Drew Brees, unstoppable. But the Saints defense, Al, that's the problem. They're about as effective as the mosquito repellent I wear here to combat the Zika in Miami Beach. Not too good. So I would agree with you. A lot of points will be scored. I think that Manning, Odell, Cruz are going to take full advantage of that defense or lack thereof. Look, I say it all the time, Al. New York, my hometown. It's a town for sinners, not for saints. So I'm going with Big Blue here at home.
Saints have gone over in 22 of their last 33. Breeze had the 400-yard plus game last week. But Derek Carr came into the Superdome. He threw for over 300. The Raiders scored 22 points in the fourth quarter on the Saints' home field. They overcame a 2-touchdown deficit. They got the 2-point conversion in the final minute to win the game. And the Giants are home. Eli Manning had 3 touchdown passes last week at Dallas, and the Giants offense only played, And listen, if you're thinking, let me go bet the Giants at home, lay the 4.5, let me just remind you, Big Blue, 0-4 straight up and against the spread in their last 4 home openers. Tom Coughlin may not be around, but that's enough to scare you off on the side. I'd still just go ahead, bet the over, don't even watch the game.
You got it.
Carolina and San Francisco. This is just a game that comes down to travel arrangements. And I don't understand how the NFL schedule makers, first of all, they saddle you with that awful Monday night doubleheader. We see Pittsburgh beat up Washington, and then for the nightcap, we get to see you, it was the cure for insomnia. It put you to sleep because that Washington game looked great compared to San Francisco's lullaby, 28-0 over the Rams. So you got San Francisco, short week, traveling across the country. You've got Carolina, 3 extra days of preparation since they played the Thursday night game. You have Carolina coming off the loss. Gee, they're only laying 13.5 points coming off the loss. Do you think they're going to roll in this game, Steve?
Well, it was an interesting NFL opener, and the short answer to that is probably yes, Al. They play the Broncos, a repeat of the Super Bowl, without Peyton Manning, and you got to believe for Carolina, this is a big bounce back opportunity. I mean, Cam Newton's going to go off. He's going to have a huge day. He's pissed about the way things went down the week before. But the Niners, they did put up 28 points on the Rams last week, and that's not bad considering they averaged about 15 points a game last year. They don't have to score that many for this game to go over the posted total. That's San Fran I'm talking about, because Carolina may go over the total themselves. I'm going over the total here, Al, over 45.5. It's like shooting ducks in a barrel.
Definitely not a game I would touch, to be honest with you, side or total. To me, it's the who cares game of the week. But hey, we move on to one of the more interesting games, Arizona and Tampa Bay. I think a lot of people are going to be enthused about Tampa Bay because there the Buccaneers go. They went to Atlanta. They fall down early. Jameis Winston comes back, 4 touchdown passes. Tampa Bay beats Atlanta for the 3rd time in 2 years. But it's the Atlanta Falcons, a team that last year had a whopping 19 sacks. This year, again, absolutely no pressure on Jameis Winston. He carved up their secondary. Now you got the Buccaneers on the road for a 2nd straight week against a Cardinals team that was totally manhandled and outplayed at home. A Cardinals team whose general manager was not happy that his team sleepwalked pretty much through the first half. But hey, maybe this is why you should pay a little more attention to the preseason. Maybe instead of resting your starters all but the first half of game number 3, maybe you should play them a little more, because otherwise you won't fall down 10-0 at the end of 1 quarter and your offense would look comatose. But the bottom line is Arizona's got to play better. Now, you got some problems with this Arizona defense, specifically at cornerback, where last week, the Patriots just carved up Brandon Williams, the rookie they got out there from Texas A&M. But I don't think Jameis Winston is going to have nearly as much success against this Arizona defense that he did against that Atlanta defenseless unit. But again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier. What do people remember? They saw that nationally televised game. The Cardinals played poorly, and they see in the newspaper, boy, Jameis Winston had 4 touchdown passes. They beat up Atlanta. That's what's going to register. You got this cheap price, Arizona. Touchdown. People are going to be enthralled with the Bucs, and I think that's the wrong move.
We talked about it earlier, and it's the perception play of the week. That's what this is, because, right, the Bucs and Jameis Winston coming off an impressive 7-point win over Atlanta. They looked great. And on the other side, Arizona, if you can't beat the Patriots without Gronk and Brady, then you might as well just quit. So everyone looks at this game like Tampa Bay's got a real shot, when they don't. At the end of the day, for all the reasons you stated, Arizona, off to a late start this season, creates this value. So now all of a sudden you can cash in on a very cheap home favorite in Arizona. So I think that you throw out game 1, and every now and then you got to throw a game out. Game 1's first games of the season, great games to throw out. Throw this one out. Grab the value with Arizona, lay the 6.5. It's less than a touchdown, and get the W, cash the ticket.
Also, Arizona is one of those teams I think is a prime team. If you're looking for a team to tease, that's just one of those great numbers, 6.5 to 7, and a 2-team 6-point teaser. Boom, you're taking them. You're basically saying, hey, just got to win the game straight up, which they're obviously going to do. It's a must-win game. They're going to do it. Now, this next game, however, Denver at home against Indianapolis, this is a game where you definitely do not throw out the results of week number 1 when you factor in the handicapping of this particular contest. Because when I look at what Indianapolis did last week at home against Detroit, losing to the Lions, losing to a Lions team in the way they did it, they could not stop a Detroit team on the ground. A Detroit team that last year was dead last in the NFL running the ball, only averaged like 88 yards a game, and yet the Lions ran for like 115 yards. And then you look at the Colts. They have not been able to protect Andrew Luck at all. Their offensive line has been rebuilt, reshuffled, whatever you want to call it. They haven't had much success. Now, Luck had a good game against Detroit, but that's Detroit. This is Denver. And I'm thinking what Marshall and what DeMarco Ware and what Von Miller did to Cam Newton, Oh, it's going to be a long day, and it's double revenge for Denver. And I'm looking at this, Bright, and you got Denver with the extra day's rest, and they didn't play that well other than the fourth quarter at home against Carolina. Boy, this is a cheap price for the Broncos.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if this Luck thinks he's going to light up the Denver defense like he lit up the Lions, he's a fool, and so is anybody that would bet that way. The story out of Denver last week is they finally got their general back at quarterback. I mean, more impressive than the stats and the win for Simeon was the fact that he did it right out of the box, game one, under tremendous pressure and shade from the shadow of Peyton Manning's legacy. I think he came out. He had a wonderful game. I think he's going to get better. I think he's going to improve on it. The crowd's going to be behind him. I think that the Denver defense is what won the Super Bowl for them last year. It's what's going to make them great this year as well. Game one was evidence of that. I like Denver here. I think they blow this Indy team out of the water.
And listen, if you couldn't stop the Detroit Lions at home, this is a Denver team that wants to run ball. We saw that last year. You saw C.J. Anderson, 20 carries, 92 yards last week against a pretty good Carolina defense. You know Denver's going to pound that ball against that suspect Indianapolis defense that couldn't stop the Lions on the ground. Next game, Oakland. Listen, I think it's pretty damn good that this is a team that scored 20-some points in the fourth quarter at New Orleans. They overcame a 2-touchdown deficit to beat the Saints. But then at the same time, you have to say, what were you down by 20-some points at New Orleans? And what were you doing having to overcome that deficit to win that game at the same time? Now, that's true. You got momentum. You're coming back home. I think the Raiders are an up-and-coming team. I don't know if they're that much better than a 500 team. But I do know one thing. The Falcons still aren't any good defensively. They still don't have a pass rush, as I talked about earlier. And I think Derek Carr and this Raiders team is going to be able to move the ball at will against the Falcons. Pretty cheap price for the Silver and Black, 4.5 in their home opener.
Yeah, Al, I mean, you say it all the time. You don't put good money on bad teams. And this Atlanta team is a bad team. Look, men lie, women lie. Numbers sometimes, they just don't lie. And Oakland, like you mentioned, has the momentum headed into week 2. They face a team with a weak defense, a questionable heart. Atlanta hasn't cashed many tickets lately. They're 2-11 against the spread, the last 13 overall. 1-5 against the spread, the last 6 on the road. 1-6 against the spread, the last 7 following a loss. I could go on and on and on. Oakland, on the other hand, they're 4-1 against the spread. The last time these two teams met, the last 5 times, they're 4-1. All the numbers point to Oakland here. I'm sorry, Al. This one's too easy. I'm going Oakland minus 4.5.
I mean, you know, Derek Carr threw for 319 yards on the road at New Orleans. Now he's coming home, and he's going to face an Atlanta defense that Jameis Winston threw for 281 yards and 4 touchdowns in Atlanta against the Falcons. So again, I think Oakland is the way to go. And then the most intriguing game on the card, it's the Sunday night game. You've got Green Bay going to Minnesota, Vikings opening up their new stadium. Vikings, another one of those teams, they were down by 10 points. They had to turn it around after halftime at Tennessee, the Titans of all people. They used 2 defensive turnovers to get 14 points. Adrian Peterson was stopped cold by the Titans defense, 19 carries, only 31 yards. You know, the Packers, I was impressed because you saw a Packers team last year that couldn't move the ball. The pass offense was like ranked 23rd in the league. The offense just struggled because of all the injuries, first starting with Jordy Nelson, and then it just kind of trickled down. But you saw Nelson come back after missing last season with a knee injury. You know, he wasn't a key, integral part of the offense last week at Jacksonville, but he had 6 catches. He had 32 yards. He had a touchdown pass. But more importantly, just his mere presence opened up everything for Aaron Rodgers. And suddenly Randall Cobb becomes more of a weapon. Everybody else became more of a weapon. And that just makes Aaron Rodgers so much more dangerous. And I think that's going to make the Vikings have a real long night in Minneapolis in their home opener.
You know, Al, with these Sunday night games, there's such a heightened pressure because it's that Sunday night bailout game of the week. And, you know, you want to just try to right all wrongs. And a lot of times we overemphasize those games. However, I do believe in this case we've got one. I agree with you 100%. Aaron Rodgers, as successful as he's been in the NFL, historically, he really doesn't do well against this Minnesota team. I think that creates a little line value. But you know how, with betting, the past is the past, and the future, well, it's never guaranteed. So that being said, I think this Green Bay team is flying a little bit under the radar right now. They're a little bit of a sleeper. For some reasons, the fans and the bettors haven't caught on yet to how good they are, especially compared to some of these mediocre teams. We saw it last week with the easy cover. I think we'll see it this week with the easy cover too. I like Green Bay here on the road.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think this is going to be one of those nip and tuck affairs. I don't think this is going to be one of those 24-23 games. I think Green Bay is actually going to win this game somewhere by 7 to 10 points. I think it's going to be a lot easier than anyone really forecasted. I think the Vikings here, with their quarterback issues early in the season, it's going to take a while for that offense to gel. And if you couldn't get anything going against Tennessee, I just don't see you this early in the season getting the job done against Green Bay. So that's it. Week number 2, we've broken the games down for you. We're going to be here each and every week. For Steve Budin, Al DeMarco here. This week's show is done. We'll catch you next week, once again, with the Football Insiders. Good luck, everybody.